This is the Germans from Russia Experience, Episode 16, Murder Mystery near Fresno's Rooshian Town in 1896, Part 4. Welcome to the Germans from Russia Experience. I am the creator and your host, Elisa Long Rodriguez, and I am here to inspire you and others to learn anything and everything about your own family heritage by providing information, experiences, and stories about a special group of people, the Germans from Russia. Hello, everyone. Today I will continue to read parts of newspaper articles, all from June 7th, 1896, just 36 hours after the murders. I hope to get through all of them, and if time remains, I will go on to articles from June 8th. There are just so many of them, and there are different details within each one. I've gone through them all, and I will try to skip through the parts that are repeated so often. All right, so here we go. Sunday, June 7th, 1896, the Daily Nonpareil from Council Bluffs, Iowa. Armenians murdered. Bones of 3 people unearthed by a plow. Now we know that's not possible if they were just killed the day before. Fresno, California, June 6th. A crime which for what of atrocities has no equal to the criminal history of Fresno County was perpetuated last night near this city. The 3 victims were all of one family, father, daughter, and son. They were Stephen Shahamarian, his daughter Queefen, it says Kueefen. I have no idea where that spelling came from. Shahamirian, aged 27, and Benjamin Shahamirian, aged about 18, all Armenians by birth. The triple murder occurred in the vineyard of Dr. Mukes in Fresno Colony. The crime is as mysterious as sanguinary. The identity of the assassin has not yet been established, although one person, Daniel Shahamarian, a nephew of the slaughtered Stephen, is in custody under suspicion. Just after dark, people residing contiguous to the Mukes vineyard heard 3 pistol shots, which attracted special attention. At 7 o'clock this morning, a plow from the Mukes ranch suddenly came upon the bones of the murdered Armenians. All were shot in the back and lay together by the side of an irrigation ditch. There is no known motive for the crime. Okay, so a few different things there, but maybe the distance of how far away this newspaper was from California and the time period, before the turn of the century. Maybe some of these journalists made up a few things along the way. It says they were all laying together, which we know is not true from many other accounts. And so just, again, so interesting. Okay, next article. The Pittsburgh Press, and this is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, also Sunday, June 7th. 3 murdered. A nephew of one victim was arrested on suspicion. Fresno, California, June 6th. Stephen Shahamarian, Kueefen Shahamarian, aged 27, and Benjamin Shahamarian, aged 18, daughter and son, and Armenians by birth, were murdered last night in the vineyard of Dr. Mukes in Fresno Colony by unknown persons. Daniel Shahamarian, a nephew of the slaughtered Stephen, is in custody under suspicion. And that is all that one said. Very short article in the Pittsburgh Press. Okay, back to California newspapers. Now we have the San Francisco Call and Post, also Sunday, June 7th. Triple murder near Fresno. An aged Armenian and his 2 children put to death, lured to a lonely spot and killed. Their bodies found in a vineyard on the outskirts of the city. suspicion points to Russian colonists, dun, 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 believed to have sought revenge for insults to their wives and daughters. Okay, the first section of this is very much a repeat, so I will skip ahead. The triple murder occurred in the vineyard of Dr. Mewks on Cherry Avenue in Fresno Colony. The crime is as mysterious as sanguinary, and the identity of the ferocious assassin has not been established. But evidence evolved at the inquest tonight gives the authorities a tangible clue upon which to work. This evidence supplies almost conclusive proof that the Shahamarian family was destroyed by the father or brother of the Russian matron or maid who had been subject to gross indignities by the young Shahamarian. So these people just go right out and say it, that they think that the Russians did it. Possibly the assassin was assisted by others of his countrymen, and it is likely that the intention at first was not to slay either of the trio, but to punish the young man at the whipping post. Having taken him from home by force, his father and sister may have followed, and in an ensuing struggle all were killed. Daniel Shahamirian, a nephew of Shahamarian, was arrested today on suspicion, but was released late tonight after it was learned from the testimony of the Russian woman at the inquest that her countrymen had met the night before and resolved to take the law into their own hands to avenge the repeated insults to their wives and daughters. Okay, this makes me think about this meeting that they supposedly had, that they could have determined to do exactly what it says there. I don't remember those notes from the inquest, and continue. Okay, some repeat there. Next, how they came to meet their horrible death in Dr. Mewks' vineyard a mile from home is one of the many strange features over which the officers have been puzzling all day. Lying almost in a group with pistol wounds in the head of each, they undoubtedly must have met death at the same time. The bodies were not discovered until this morning about 7 o'clock, when it says Bagdoan again, but now we know it's Bulgarian, a laborer employed by K.M. Nishkin, who leases the Mewks vineyard, was engaged in cultivating the soil between the rows of vines. His horse, okay, that's all same exact word, so we'll skip that. The laborer first called to Shahamarian, thinking that the old man was asleep. Not until he approached nearer to the body did he see that the old man was dead. It was then that he saw the body of the murdered daughter. Bulgarian ran back to the Nishkin residence with all possible speed. He and Nishkin returned to the scene, and then they found the body of the son lying about 25 feet distance from the others. Nishkin came to town and notified the authorities. Sheriff Scott and Deputy Cash Thomas quickly responded, as did Coroner Long. When the officers arrived, they found a large number of neighbors about the bodies and tracks leading away from the place, which might have been of great assistance in ferreting out the murderer, had all been obliterated. The tracks between the bodies had been carefully preserved, however. Coroner Long immediately brought the bodies to this city and placed them in the morgue. A large crowd quickly gathered about, and the coroner ordered that the doors be closed. Does that mean that they're usually open whenever the coroner's doing their work? I guess they didn't have TV. Curiosity. Wow. The news of the murder quickly spread about town, and not since the time of Sontag and Evans has there been so much excitement here. Now, I had to look up Sontag and Evans, and I found out that they were Chris Evans and John Sontag. They were from Visalia, and they robbed trains in the 1880s and the 1890s. They were seen as heroes, kind of like Robin Hoods, I guess. A lot of people felt like they were taking on the evil railroad empire. However, they were depicted as crazy outlaws in the newspapers. Notwithstanding the fact that the doors were closed, a large crowd stood about the undertaking establishment during the entire day, and policemen were required to keep the street clear. Within, a horrible sight presented itself. Stretched out on impoverished slabs lay the three bodies, father, son, and daughter, side by side. On the uneven surface of the ground, the bodies had become rigid and contorted. Just to the right of the right eye of the father was a large clot of blood, marking the entrance of the missile of destruction. Powder burns formed a circle around the wound, 2 inches in diameter. The son's face was covered with blood. A bullet hole was found in the back of his head, and there were signs of powder burns. He had fallen partly on one side, and the blood had trickled down on his face. The daughter was shot in the right temple, and in her case, there were no signs of powder burns. Shortly after the finding of the bodies, Sheriff Scott arrested Daniel Shahamarian on suspicion. The sheriff went to the Shahamarian house and made a search of it. The dishes were found in place, and the unfortunates must have been called after finishing their evening meal. They had evidently left the house before bedtime, for their bodies were garbed in the clothes in which they had been working. While Scott was at the house, neighbors suggested that he pay a visit to the home of Daniel Shahamarian, who had acted somewhat strangely in the morning. The sheriff went over to his house and found the young man dressing a chicken. Shahamarian seemingly had not yet learned of the fate which had befallen his uncle and cousins. He affected great surprise when told the news. After some conversation, Sheriff Scott asked Shahamarian if he had a pistol. The young man went into the house and brought one out. The officer was startled to find clots of blood on the end of the barrel. The young man accounted for the presence of those by stating that he had killed the chicken with it. I don't know jack about guns, except from, things I've heard here and there. Certainly haven't handled them. But wouldn't a gun, well, it doesn't say the caliber here, but a lot of handguns, if it's a big handgun, it would just blow a chicken apart. Like, how would you use a gun to kill a chicken? From what I was told from my grandmother, that her mother, and that was in the 1920s, would just grab the chicken by the neck and just sling it around, break its neck, and it would die, and they would go from there. I can't imagine using a gun to kill a chicken. That just seems kind of bizarre. Shahamarian was then directed to turn his pockets out. The right front pocket in his trousers was clotted with blood. Again, Shahamarian explained by exhibition a cut on his finger, which he said he had bled profusely. He had wrapped the lining of the pocket around the finger to stop the bleeding. Sheriff Scott decided that it would be best to take Shahamarian in charge and brought him to the jail. At the jail, the prisoner was seen by a call correspondent, the journalist. He is a youth of 21, fairly intelligent, and seemed to be The wording is really smushed here on this old newspaper article. Let's see. Seemed to be considerably disturbed by the bloody events. Okay, got it. Of the preceding night. He asserted that he knew of no circumstance which might have led to the butchery, and declared that his uncle, as far as he knew, had incurred the active enmity of no man. Okay, here is a section. I have a note that it says it's the first mention of this. Friends of the youth insist that he would not be capable of such a terrible crime. He was always been a quiet and industrious young man. He speaks English poorly, and it was with difficulty that a statement could be gotten from him. A theory was advanced that Shahamarian exterminated the entire family of his uncle in order that his father and then himself might get possession of their property, which is valued at $5,000. And I looked that up, and in today's money, in 2025, that would be $189,000. So it's not a huge amount of money for land. The uncle had a daughter in the Stockton Insane Asylum, and the promoters of the theory contend that in all probability, Shahamirian did not believe she could lay claim to the property. On some pretext or order, they believed Shahamirian lured his victims to the place most advantageous to him for the preparation of the triple murder. But in view of late developments, this contention finds but few supporters. It was known that the young Shahamarian was guilty of several offenses against young Russian girls. And again, they're talking about Germans from Russia here. It is also known that the Russians had been talking strongly of taking the fellow from his home and giving him a whipping. Only the day before he was killed, young Shahamarian made improper advances to a Russian woman who was working in an adjoining field. The authorities had been appealed to, but the case presented to them was not of such a nature that conviction could be secured. The Russians held a meeting, and it is said they decided to take matters into their own hands. It seems incredible that the Russians would do any shooting. They might have given the young man a whipping, as he undoubtedly justly deserved, but the theory is that some of the Russians called the boy out of the house or possibly made him come by force. The father and the sister followed to assist Benjamin, having known of the hatred of the Russians for him. But a struggle ensued, and in self-defense or otherwise, the Russians shot all three. If this theory is a correct one, the deed must have been done by some father or husband whose child or wife had been insulted by the youth. This may be the reason why the son was killed first, and then the others, that the murderer's identity might not be discovered. Coroner Long held an inquest on the bodies late this afternoon. Neighbors stated that they heard 3 shots in the vicinity at about 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening. But a man named Freeman stated that he had been hunting about that time, and he fired 3 shots, which were the ones which had been heard. Chinamen who were camping a short distance from the scene of the tragedy testified that at a late hour they heard 3 shots and 2 or 3 screams. They were afraid to get up and investigate. Nothing further was developed at the inquest. Sheriff Scott stated to the call correspondent tonight that the case was one of the most mysterious which he had ever encountered. He released young Shahamarian from jail tonight, as he did not believe there was any evidence to warrant holding him. The sheriff is inclined to believe that there is something in the Russian theory. Stephen Shahamarian was one of California's pioneer Armenians. He came to the state 30 years ago. He and his son and daughter have been living upon a 5-acre tract adjoining the southern limits of the city. He was a leader in the Armenian fight of the Congregational Church in this city about 2 years. The Armenians became too numerous in the church. Shahamarian was elected deacon, but the American members of the church refused to recognize his election. Okay, that was all the San Francisco Call-and-Post. So, yes, I think I gave you some information before about that Stephen came to California, he went back to Armenia, and then he came back to California. And that's why it's saying here that he's been in California for 30 years, but his children are both younger than that, and they were also born in Turkish Armenia. So he went back, had some kids, still have no idea about a wife or a mother to these children, but he came back with them. Now, I haven't been able to find exact details of when they all came to California for this last time. I'll keep looking. All right. San Francisco Chronicle from Sunday, June 7th. Shot down in the night. A whole Armenian family killed. Father, son, and daughter. Thought to be the work of Russians. The victims found in a Fresno vineyard a mile from their home. Okay, some repeated stuff. And then, there are no end of theories, but all except one or two can be rejected at once as untenable. Stephen Shahamarian, age 55, Queen Shahamarian, his daughter, age 30, and Benjamin Shahamarian, age 18, his son, were found at sunrise Saturday morning in a vineyard belonging to Dr. T.R. Mukes, nearly 2 miles southwest of Fresno. Their dead bodies were discovered by an aged Armenian named Volga, who was on his way to his daily work. He did not stay to examine how the parties had met their death, but spread the alarm among the neighbors. The sheriff and coroner were notified, but unfortunately, by the time the officers arrived on the scene, all footprints of the murderer had been trampled out by the people from the vicinity who had assembled. The place where the bodies lay is about 300 yards from the nearest house. It is on the bank of the irrigation canal. The murdered family were 2 miles from home by road and more than a mile in a direct line, and there is no reason known why they should have gone to that secluded place. The fact that they went there can be accounted for only on the theory that they were... Okay. The newspaper, I was hoping I could get through it before the newspaper got all mushy, but, these are old newspapers, and they've been digitized and uploaded, and there are some places where the words are so mushy I cannot make them out. So that's one of them. By the murderer to the lonely spot, and they're killed. Their home was in Peter's edition of Fresno, where they owned a small house and a 5-acre vineyard. While they were not rich, they were by no means poor. They owned their home, and their little vineyard furnished them with all that they needed. They were honest and industrious and had enough money or property to tempt not anyone to murder them on that account. No one supposes that they were killed for their money. All theories follow other lines, and it may be stated that there were 2 distinct theories held by persons who are familiar with the family and the neighborhood. Okay, as I'm getting to the next pages, there's more that's smeared. I'll do my best. A cousin of the son and daughter, named Daniel Shahamarian, about 22 years old, is in jail on suspicion. There are several incidents connecting him with the affair, yet none of them but might reasonably be explained away. He was taken in custody within a few hours after the bodies were discovered. The strongest grounds for suspicion against him is that he was at the house of the murdered people late Friday evening and had supper with them. His actions were construed as suspicious. When arrested, he had a .38 caliber. Okay, that's where I saw the size of the pistol. That's a big gun. .38 caliber pistol in his pocket, the size of the one which had been used in the murder. The pistol was bloody. He had carried it in his pocket of a new pair of overalls, and in the pocket where the pistol had rested, there was a spot of blood, showing that the revolver had been put in his pocket while the blood was fresh. In explanation of this, he says that the blood is probably that of a chicken, which he shot early Saturday morning. When the officers went to his room in the western part of town, they found a half-dressed chicken. He says he had proceeded that far with dressing it when he received news of the murder, and he dropped everything and went to the scene. Okay, that's a little different. The pistol and the bloody pocket will be carefully kept, and the blood will be submitted to a microscopic examination in order to determine whether the blood is human or that of a chicken. It is stated by some of the neighbors that young Shahamarian some time ago wanted to marry the girl who was killed, and that the father and the brother objected. This is put forward as a possible motive, and while it will be duly investigated, it is not the line on which the hardest work at investigation is being done, nor the field which promises the most results. There are a number of Russians who live in the vicinity, and it is known that some of them have expressed bitter enmity toward the young man who was murdered. About 2 weeks ago, the wife of a Russian named Albert Brandenburg appealed to one of the justice courts of this city for a warrant for the arrest of Benjamin Shahamarian, charging him with enticing a 3-year-old daughter of Mrs. Brandenburg into a barn and grossly abusing her. There were no witnesses except 2 or 3 very small children, and the justice of the peace told the mother that there must be more evidence to secure a conviction, and he declined to issue the warrant. About the same time, a charge was made of a similar nature against young Shahamirian by Reverend Jacob Legler, pastor of the German Russian Church in Peter's Addition. And that was the church that was just built the year before. 1895 was a brand new church. A young girl of the ministers had been offered gross indignities by the young man. There were other complaints of a similar nature against him, and the Russians were very angry. They had talked among their neighbors that the law would not protect him, and that they need not expect justice from that source, and that the best thing would be to administer a whipping to the young man. 3 facts were all brought out at the coroner's inquest, and it is said that there is much other testimony of the same kind which will be adduced when the inquest is resumed next Thursday, and that'll be June 11th. It was adjourned till then in order to obtain the testimony of persons who could not now be found. An examination of the locality and of the positions of the dead bodies, together with the nature of the wounds and a few footprints which had not been trampled out by the neighbors when the officers reached the scene, showed that it can be determined with considerable certainty how the murder was committed. The father and the son were evidently shot from very close quarters, as is shown by the powder burns surrounding the wounds. There can be little doubt that the young man was shot first. However, some claim that he was the last one killed. He was shot in the back of the head, and the pistol was held low and aimed upward. as was shown by the passing of the ball through his coat collar. The clothing was burned about 1 inch on all sides of the wound. The pistol could not have been more than a foot away when the fatal shot was fired. The indications are that the murderer was walking behind the boy and thrust the pistol against him and fired. The course of the bullet through his head indicates that such was the case. The positions of the other bodies and the manner in which they were struck strengthens this supposition. If the murderer and the 3 intended victims were walking through the vineyard and the boy was shot, his father and sister might be supposed to flee. This they evidently did. Their bodies lay 60 feet away and side by side. 3 tracks led from the boy's body to where they lay. One track was that of the father and the other of the daughter, and the third was without doubt that of the murderer, who was pursuing them. The footprints showed that they were running. Okay, now they're saying that there's clear footprints, where in all the other articles so far they've said that they were messed up because so many people came upon the scene. Continuing. The woman was shot nearly in the back of the head. She was killed instantly and apparently never struggled after the fall. There were no powder burns on her body, and the shot must have been fired from a distance of several feet. The father was shot in the face. The bullet entered near the corner of the eye and ranging upward, passing clear through his head, and was found in his hat. Not only was there a deep powder burn around the wound, but his hand was burned by powder, as if he had thrown his hands to his face to shield himself from the pistol which he had seen pointed at him as he turned when his daughter fell dead. The hand was not wounded. The bullet made a very large opening where it entered the skull, otherwise indicating that it had been fired from very close range. None of the bodies had been moved after they fell. The theory advanced early in the day that they had been chloroformed at their home and carried to the vineyard, and they then shot. Yeah, this is kind of mushy. Then shot has nothing to support it. Oh, the blood on the ground where they lay shows that they died on the spot. There were a number of persons who heard 3 shots fired in that vicinity around 8 o'clock on Friday evening, and it was taken for granted early in the day that those shots were the ones that ended the lives of the 3 Armenians. But upon further investigation and upon the discovery of further evidence, it is almost certain that the murder was committed later at night. But just how late, nobody has been found who knows. A young man named Freeman says that he was hunting in the vicinity around 8 o'clock and fired 3 times in very quick succession. And it is reasonably certain that the shots heard were his. This is more than probable in the face. Okay, this is kind of mushy too. This is going to be hard, but let's see. This is more than probable in the face of positive evidence that Benjamin Shahamarian was seen alive in front of his home. M. Simonian, a carriage painter, saw the young man and talked with him at 8:30 o'clock that evening. Mr. Simonian had his bicycle lamp lit, and he saw the young man's face distinctly and says he could not possibly be mistaken. This then would go to prove that the shots fired in the vicinity of the vineyard at 8 o'clock were not those of the murderer. Perhaps the most direct evidence as to the fatal shooting is that of the crew of 10 Chinese who were employed in a fruit vineyard adjoining the vineyard. They have quarters in the orchard and sleep there. Several of them heard the shooting at 8 o'clock. Late in the night, they were awakened by more shots and at the same time heard screams, which ceased with the last pistol shot. While they are not positive as to the exact time and the number of shots, they are certain that it occurred at a late hour. There yet remains one thing, and a very important one, which has not yet been explained. Why did the murdered family go to the vineyard more than a mile distant from the nearest route they could have followed? They had been at work in their own vineyard all the preceding day, had eaten their supper at home, and had no business in that direction so far as can be learned. And they went there at a late and unusual hour. There seems to be no doubt that they were decoyed there by a person who killed them, or by some confederate. They had on their working clothes as well. An effort was made today to gain admittance to their house, with the hope that some clue might be discovered there. But the house was locked, and no one could be found with a key. The inquest on the dead bodies was held late this afternoon and attracted a large crowd of Armenians from neighboring colonies. So great was the rush that the morgue doors were locked, and only witnesses were admitted to the inquest. The autopsy was held early in the day by Dr. Davidson and Dr. Long. They discovered no signs of violence except the wounds, any of which would have been instantly fatal. The murderer was evidently a dead shot. The two most important witnesses were Reverend Jacob Legler and Mrs. Brandenburg. The latter was the woman who had appealed to the court to arrest young Shahamarian for his treatment of her little girl. The minister had the same grievance against him. Her husband, a dark-complected German Russian, had come all the way from Hollister, where he had been at work when he received the news of his child's assault. He arrived in Fresno but a few hours before the Shahamarian family was murdered. He could not speak English, but through an interpreter, he related that his wife had told him upon his arrival at home. He admitted that he had expressed a strong desire to see the young man severely whipped for his crime, but he denied that he had attended any meeting or had taken any steps toward taking revenge upon the young man. Okay, here it says Brandenburg is a German Russian, dark-complected German Russian, but I actually did his family tree just to find out, who he was and where he came from, and he came straight from Germany. So he wasn't a German from Russia that I could find. Possibly his wife was. I could look into that. Okay, wrapping this article up, it was stated at the inquest that there was some sort of a meeting at the Russians' schoolhouse on the night of the murder, but no one could be found who had been there or knew anything more about it than seeing lights in the windows. It was stated that Mrs. Brandenburg had told the neighbors that when her husband came home, something would be done. If the theory is accepted, which is the favorite one with those who have investigated it, that the Russians took the law into their own hands, it still leaves unexplained why the whole family should have been wiped out. Late tonight, the young man who was arrested on suspicion was allowed to leave the jail on his own recognizance. The theory that the murder was committed by enraged Russians is held by most people. Every new development points in that direction. All right, so those are all the articles I could find through June 7th. The next one I have is June 8th. And of course, I'm dying to continue reading these because I want to find out what happens too. I still don't really know yet. This is the Expositor, so that Fresno newspaper, Monday, June 8th. One grave received them all. The murdered Shahamarians laid to rest. No tangible clue to the cowardly assassin. The licentiousness conduct of Benjamin, the idiotic son, the most logical incentive to the sanguinary triple butchery. Russians suspected of this terrible crime. Okay, that was the whole headline. Late Sunday afternoon, one wide, deep grave dug in the sandy soil of the Armenian cemetery received the disfigured remains of the 3 victims of Friday night's revolting tragedy. With his daughter on one side and his son on the other, old Stephen Shahamarian was left to sleep the last long sleep, and as the clods pattered upon the lid of the rough boxes that hid the somber coffins from view, his countrymen alternately prayed for his well-being and execrated his cowardly murderer. No religious ceremonies were held at the undertaking parlors of Smith and McMaster's, where the bodies of the 3 unfortunates lay from Saturday morning until the hour of the funeral. But at the ceremony, Reverend Mr. Gillian of the K Street M.E. Church held a solemn service for the dead, and Reverend A.J. Malconian eloquently recited a prayer. The entire Armenian colony attended the funeral. The identity of the assassin is still shrouded in mystery, and it is evident that the peace officers are not, the word is mushy, sanguine, optimistic, of effecting his capture. They seem to be certain, however, that the murderer is a member of the Russian settlement, and within a few days may make several arrests. Daniel Shahamarian, nephew of the dead Stephen Shahamarian, was released from custody Saturday night, District Attorney Snow having convinced himself of the lad's innocence. Sheriff J. Scott and District Attorney Snow are indefatigably working to bring to justice the slayer of the unfortunate trio. And Constable Shaw and Krucher are provided to be able assistance. It is known that several persons threatened to visit condign punishment upon idiotic Ben Shahamarian, whose flagitious conduct with young Russian girls had roused their ire, and it is now generally believed that some of the indignant Muscovites either forced or enticed Ben to the lonely Muke's vineyard, their object being to inflict upon him great bodily harm, and that the father and the sister, coming to his relief, shared the same fate that was intended for the son alone. The theory of the murder and suicide has been advanced, but is not entertained by District Attorney Snow. That Shahamarian would murder his children and then shoot himself is not probable, especially as he was not suffering the pangs of poverty. Supporters of the suicide theory maintain that the pistol used by the frenzied father might have been removed by friends before the arrival of Sheriff Scott. The officers have been informed that shots were near the Mukes Vineyard at 10 p.m. Friday, and that a wagon and pair left the neighborhood, proceeding rapidly at midnight. Coroner Long, wow, that's really new. We hadn't heard that. Coroner Long commenced an official inquiry on Saturday evening, but no details other than those already given by the expositor were elicited. The inquest will be resumed on Thursday evening at 8 o'clock. Okay, we're on Monday. Los Angeles Times, Monday, June 8th. Daniel not a murderer. The Armenian tragedy deepening. Russians suspected of having done the crime. The elder Shahamarian probably decoyed to death. Okay, let's see what's new in here. The murder of the 3 Armenians is as much mystery as ever. The coroner, sheriff, and district attorney have been working on this case, but so far as can be learned, they have not obtained any evidence leading to the identity of the assassin. Daniel Shahamirian, nephew of the murdered father, is now generally believed to be innocent of the crime, as no motive can be ascribed. Besides, Daniel is a quiet, inoffensive fellow and does not have the appearance of being capable of such a heinous crime. Suspicion centers upon the Russians, whose daughter was once assaulted by the younger Shahamarian and who has since been bitter against the murdered family. The coroner's jury adjourned last night for several days to permit the accumulation of evidence, information now at hand being insufficient to justify the arrest of any particular person. Many influential Armenians are now working on the case. Oh, that's new. They are proceeding on an altogether different hypothesis than the officers, and they believe more than one person is involved in the guilt. Much animosity appears to have existed between the Armenians and settlers of Rooshian Town, and the former believe the murder was the result of strained relations, the elder Shahamarian being a leading aggressor in the hostilities. Oh, well, that's also new. Much mystery enshrouds the affair, as no reason can be given for all 3 victims being a mile from the home at so late an hour at night. The conclusion most generally entertained is that the elder Shahamarian was induced to meet someone at the fatal spot upon business representations and was killed. That his prolonged absence caused his son to go on a tour of investigation, he meeting the same fate. The testimony of the Chinaman living near the pistol shots were heard at the late hour at night would indicate that the daughter finally went to search for her father and brother, and coming upon their dead bodies, turned to a runaway and was shot in the back of the head. Okay, gosh, there's a lot of new kind of squirrely stuff in there. If the daughter did go there by herself, by wagon, wouldn't the wagon still be there? I can't imagine walking at that time of night. I mean, how would she even know where to go? There weren't street lights or anything like that. So that one's kind of weird. That one's kind of weird, saying that she would come along later. I would think she would go for help. And it seems to me that she probably also liked Daniel, but knew that she couldn't be with him. Why wouldn't she go to him and ask him, for help if she thought her father and brother were in trouble? So that was kind of weird. Okay, the next few articles are repeats of all the details. Now, I put up a bunch of pictures on my Facebook page a couple weeks back. The San Francisco Call-and-Post had these drawings, which were awesome. So if you haven't seen those, go check them out on my Facebook page. The humble cottage from which the Shahamarian family was decoyed to death. Then we have an actual drawing of Queen Shahamarian. We have a drawing of Stephen Shahamarian, looks like Mark Twain. And we have a drawing of Daniel, Shahamarian. We don't have Stephen for some reason, but it shows another picture of the home, the vineyard. And then this one says, cabin from which the ill-fated Armenian family was decoyed to their death. This is from the San Francisco Chronicle, another drawing. In the San Francisco Chronicle, we also have the vineyard where the 3 bodies were found, a drawing of the vineyard, and there's an O and an A. The O is the father, the A is the daughter, and then there's an X over here that indicates Stephen. I'm sorry, not Stephen, Benjamin. And then there's a drawing of the vineyard again in the San Francisco Column-Post where the 3 bodies are laying there. And that was very surprising to find. It says, the bodies of Stephen Shahamarian and his daughter Queen were found side by side, while 20 paces distant was the corpse of the son Benjamin. So check those out if you haven't looked at them. All right, I think I'm going to need to stop there. Got through a good chunk of newspapers. Some new things have come up, some new things to think about. I am going to be very interested to find out what you think happened. So if you want to send me a little note on my Facebook page and give me an idea of what you think happened. The next articles I'll read the next time are going to start at June 9th. So again, really just a very few days after. As time goes on, there's less and less articles. So they will go faster. And I'm so glad you're still here with me. I'm glad you're interested in this story, because if you weren't, you wouldn't be listening to me right now. So thank you all for coming, and I will see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Germans from Russia experience. I hope that something you heard today will inspire you to learn anything and everything you can about your own ancestors. If you like what you heard, please leave a review, like and share this podcast. You can comment directly by emailing me at thegermansfromrussiaexp@gmail.com. Also, like my Facebook page, The Germans from Russia Experience Podcast. Please see my show notes for website suggestions to begin or continue your discovery of your Germans from Russia roots and about this episode. My podcast artwork is by Matt Wall. I received technical assistance from my friend Annie Anderson.